I remember the day I first moved into the Ashgrove Estates community. A friend of mine recommended it based on its neat, tree-lined sidewalks, well-maintained park areas, and a relatively affordable HOA fee, or so it seemed at the time. The sun was shining down on neatly trimmed lawns when I pulled up in the moving truck, boxes stacked to the roof. Right away, I caught sight of someone standing on the porch across the street, arms crossed, eyes sharp, scanning my every move. That was my very first encounter with Brenda Ramage, though I didn't know her name at the time. All I knew was that she was a woman in her mid-50s, impeccably dressed, with short, styled, dark blonde hair. She radiated this sense of authority mixed with disapproval. She was the neighborhood's self-appointed greeter and rule keeper, the one who liked to set the law around here, even beyond the official HOA guidelines. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she shouted, her voice echoing in the mostly quiet street. "Make sure to park your truck in the designated unloading area to avoid any citations." Her tone held that edge of forced politeness. I remember rolling my eyes slightly, but kept my face neutral and nodded in acknowledgement. That same night, I learned more about her from my next-door neighbor, an older gentleman named Harold who had lived in Ashgrove Estates for over 20 years. We were both taking out the trash when he casually warned me, "Watch out for Brenda Ramage. People in the neighborhood nickname her Karen, if you catch my drift. She loves telling others what they can and can't do. I don't want to scare you off, but be prepared." At first, I laughed it off. It seemed silly that one woman could cause so much trouble. And sure enough, the next few months passed smoothly. I settled in, repainted my living room, and hosted a small housewarming for a few friends. Not a peep from Brenda. If anything, I only saw her in passing, perhaps when she pulled up in her car or attended the monthly HOA meetings, which I admittedly avoided. But little by little, I noticed her small intrusions. She once taped a note to my mailbox reminding me of approved lawn fertilizer brands. She sent an email to the entire HOA list scolding a neighbor for letting their kids ride bicycles on the sidewalks without reflective vests after dusk. Minor annoyances, sure, but nothing that made me overly concerned. It wasn't until she decided to champion a bizarre new cleanliness campaign that her presence started to feel oppressive. "The bathrooms in our community must remain up to health standards," she proclaimed during one of her speeches in the HOA's monthly newsletter. "We have to ensure that no unsanitary conditions exist in the event of a community-wide inspection or pest infestation." To an outsider, it might have sounded almost reasonable. But the more I read, the more I sensed that Brenda was gearing up for some over-the-top enforcement. I rolled my eyes at the idea of inspecting personal bathrooms. Surely that was illegal. But with Ashgrove Estates' complicated CCRs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, I worried Brenda might find a loophole. When the official letters started arriving, shoved under doors in white envelopes with the HOA logo, I realized she was taking it to the next level. She demanded that each household allow her or a designated committee member to come in and photograph bathrooms for compliance. The letter alone caused a stir. My neighbors texted one another in confusion. Is this a real rule? Can she do that? We were used to the HOA dictating paint colors or fence heights, but never anything as personal as bathroom cleanliness. We all suspected this had a single source, Karen or Brenda Ramage, wielding what she believed to be unassailable power. Tension simmered in the neighborhood. Residents complained on Nextdoor about privacy violations, overreach, and the uneasy possibility of a bathroom committee. Meetings grew more heated, with a handful of Brenda's close allies supporting the measure. "This is for the greater good," declared Yvonne, who usually followed Brenda's every directive. "If we prevent mold in one unit, we prevent mold from spreading to others. Bathroom checks keep the entire building safe." But the majority of us were outraged. I recall Tim, father of 2 teenage girls, practically shouting in the conference room at the HOA clubhouse, "You want to come inside my private bathroom and snap pictures? Absolutely not. That crosses every boundary I can think of." Brenda, seated at the head of the table, gave him a thin, dismissive smile. "No one said you had to be present during the inspection, Tim. In fact, it might be easier if you step aside and let the committee do what it needs to do." The nerve of this woman. A small group of us began meeting at my place to figure out the legalities. My friend, Michelle, an amateur paralegal, pointed out that the HOA documents didn't mention the right to unannounced, or even scheduled invasive inspections. But a footnote included something about emergency measures in the event of risk to community health. That must have been Brenda's angle. She was twisting risk to community health to justify stepping inside people's bathrooms. We circled around possible solutions: a petition, a formal letter to the HOA's board, or an attorney's involvement. But attorneys are expensive, and Brenda seemed so certain she had the rules on her side. My neighbors wrung their hands, unsure if we could stand up to her. Some of them gave in and allowed the bathroom inspections under protest, hoping it would all blow over quickly. Yet, something about Brenda's fervor gave me pause. Why was she so dead set on controlling bathroom cleanliness? Did she have a personal vendetta against someone with messy habits? Was it about petty power, or had something triggered her mania for health standards? One rumor suggested that Brenda wanted to run for a larger HOA district board and needed a project to highlight her achievements. Another rumor suggested an old friend of hers had dealt with black mold in a prior neighborhood. No one really knew. Then came the real bombshell. Brenda threatened to cut off shared plumbing lines for households that refused cooperation, claiming she'd consult the city's water department. People panicked, but I suspected it was an empty threat. We all paid our water bills separately. She had no personal authority to simply cut off anyone's water. Still, her intimidation was enough to push some folks into compliance out of sheer fear. But not me. I was fed up with her. I decided to let her in only if it meant I could prove how ridiculous and invasive her approach truly was. If she wanted to walk into my bathroom, she'd see something that would drive home the message. I was never a confrontational person by nature, but Brenda's overreach forced me to take a stand. After reading her official inspection notice for the third time, an idea formed in my head. If she wants to come in and photograph my bathroom, I'll make sure every photo she takes reveals an uncomfortable truth about her invasion of privacy. So I rummaged around in my garage, looking for poster boards, paints, and markers. My plan was straightforward. I'd plaster huge signs all over the bathroom, each one emblazoned with slogans like "Stop violating my privacy" or "No trespassing in personal spaces." Big, bold letters that would dominate any photograph. In case she tried to claim ignorance, I'd also print out official references to the Fourth Amendment's right to privacy, though typically that applies to governmental intrusion, not HOAs. Still, the message would be symbolically powerful. A few neighbors came over to help. They thought the idea was hilarious, especially because Brenda typically flaunted her ability to gather evidence by snapping photos. She'd done it before, capturing images of overgrown lawns or incorrectly placed potted plants, later emailing them to the entire association. This time, the cameras would work against her. If she snapped pictures of my bathroom, she'd be capturing proof that she was in fact crossing a very personal boundary, and that I was vigorously protesting it. Paint fumes and the hum of conversation filled my living room as we prepared the posters. Michelle carefully calligraphed "Respect my home" in block letters, bright red paint across a stark white poster board. Another friend, Cassidy, drew a cartoonish image of an overzealous figure labeled HOA inspector, barging into a house uninvited, with frightened residents screaming in protest. It was ridiculous, comedic, and perfect for the point we were making. Finally, the day arrived. Brenda emailed me with a scheduled time slot, 2 p.m. on a Saturday. She insisted that if I refused, she'd note my noncompliance and recommend a hearing with the HOA disciplinary committee. Laughable, but I wanted her to walk right into my trap. Saturday came. The house was tidy, aside from the bathroom, which I turned into a mini art exhibit of privacy posters. Neon pink, yellow, and green sheets filled the walls with bold, angry slogans. The doorbell rang at 1:58 p.m. Brenda was the kind of person who prided herself on punctuality. She stood on my doorstep wearing a prim, floral blouse and pressed slacks. Behind her, I noticed Yvonne, her loyal follower, clutching a notepad, possibly to record her findings. "Good afternoon," Brenda said, a strained smile on her lips. "I hope we can get through this quickly." I nodded, stepping aside to let them in. "Yes, let's do that," I replied, feigning politeness. "I'm sure you'll find everything illuminating." Brenda led the way upstairs, immediately making a beeline for the bathroom. She stepped through the doorway and froze. Her eyes widened at the barrage of posters. One read, "This is a violation." Another, privacy over profit, and yet another, back off, Karen, spelled out in red marker. For a moment, she was speechless. I could see her mind working as she realized she'd either have to proceed with her photos, thereby capturing all these messages directed against her overreach, or leave and forfeit the inspection. Yvonne's mouth dropped open. Well, Brenda finally murmured, this is certainly an interesting choice of decor. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, absolutely. Do you want to photograph every corner? I think that's part of the inspection procedure, right? Brenda's face twitched. She was torn between backing down or doubling down. True to her nature, she opted to move forward. She pulled out her phone and snapped a few pictures, trying to angle them so the posters wouldn't be entirely visible. But the writing was everywhere, on the walls, on the mirror, even taped around the edges of the bathtub. The lens couldn't avoid them. Yvonne stood by with her notepad, scribbling something or other, likely describing the condition of the bathroom. But I didn't care about her notes. I cared about the photos. If they ended up in the HOA's official record, any board member who saw them would realize how insane this invasion was. Brenda coughed. I can see that everything is basically clean. The tiles seem fine. She spoke through clenched teeth, as if physically pained to say anything neutral. No mold or suspicious buildup. I nodded. As you can see, I do maintain cleanliness standards. Just not a fan of this method of checking. She harumphed and quickly turned to leave. I followed her and Yvonne downstairs, guiding them out. Brenda mumbled something about finishing the rest of the block and refused to look me in the eye. Yvonne's expression was less certain, as if she was starting to realize we residents might be justified in our outrage. The moment they left, I nearly doubled over in laughter. The entire inspection lasted all of 5 minutes, but it was the most satisfying 5 minutes I'd spent in a long time. That evening, word spread quickly that Brenda had completed her round of inspections and that I had created a protest in my bathroom. Some neighbors called me, cackling with delight at the thought of Karen stepping into a sea of posters criticizing her. Others admitted they wished they'd thought of something similar. But the real victory came the following week, when the HOA board held an emergency meeting to review the bathroom inspection findings. According to the bylaws, Brenda was supposed to submit photographic evidence if any bathrooms were deemed unsanitary. In an email that Brenda inadvertently copied to the entire HOA mailing list, she probably intended it only for the board. She attached a batch of pictures. She must not have realized that the images were readily visible in the email preview. The pictures displayed my bathroom's bold signs in their full glory. Lines like "Stop violating my privacy" practically jumped off the screen. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with texts and calls. Neighbors forwarded the email to me, highlighting Brenda's humiliating oversight. The screenshots were priceless. People were either furious at her or in stitches about the comedic element. HOA board members demanded an explanation. Why are you photographing large privacy protest messages in someone's bathroom? Asked one exasperated email from the vice president. This is not appropriate, and it does not reflect well on the HOA's conduct. Brenda tried to walk it back, claiming these images were only to show the presence of posters that might contribute to moisture issues. It was a pathetic excuse. Everyone saw right through it. The next day, she tried to calm the storm by sending out a formal apology. I regret any confusion regarding the inspection process. My intention was strictly to ensure health standards. The signage captured in the photographs was unexpected and in no way reflects the official stance of the HOA. But it was too late. She'd been caught with the smoking gun, so to speak. My big posters, pointing out her invasion of privacy, were now official HOA record. The board scheduled an internal hearing to discuss whether Brenda had violated guidelines by demanding intrusive inspections without a majority vote. The threat of cutting off plumbing also surfaced in the complaint. Brenda's arrogance had led her to claim powers that she never truly had. All at once, her house of cards was toppling around her. The evening of the hearing, the community center was jam-packed. Curiosity and tension filled the air. Everyone wanted to see how Brenda would squirm under scrutiny. The board members were seated at a long table facing the audience. Brenda, clad in a prim, navy blue blazer, her hair styled to perfection, sat at one end, biting her lip. I arrived a bit early to find a seat near the front. My friend Michelle waved me over. As soon as I sat down, she whispered, They're going to question Brenda about the plumbing threats and the invasion of privacy. The board is furious about the negative attention she's brought on the HOA. Sure enough, when the meeting was called to order, the board's president, Mrs. Gladstone, cleared her throat and spoke into the microphone. Ms. Ramage, it appears you unilaterally enacted an inspection policy that was not officially approved by this board. Furthermore, you threatened residents with shutoff of shared plumbing, implying you had authority over the local utilities. Could you please explain your actions? Brenda's jaw twitched. She shot the president a defensive look. I was merely acting in the best interests of the community. We've had issues with mold in the past, and I didn't want to see it spread. As for the plumbing, I never intended to literally shut off water. I just wanted to emphasize the importance of compliance. A low murmur spread through the crowd. People shook their heads, some rolling their eyes. Tim, who'd been outraged before, called out. Then why did you specifically say you'd cut it off? That's not an empty threat. It's intimidation. Brenda stiffened. It was taken out of context. The board president nodded. Let's move on to the photos you submitted. In many of these images, we see posters highlighting a protest against invasive bathroom checks. It's clear from the photos that the homeowner did not want to be inspected. The question remains, who authorized these inspections in the first place? Silence fell over the room. Brenda fidgeted with her blazer lapel. Finally, she shrugged. I believe the CCRs gave me broad authority under health and safety provisions. Perhaps I misinterpreted them. The president gestured to the open binder in front of her. Our association's legal counsel indicates that no such authority exists in these documents without a formal motion passed by a majority of the board. You acted on your own, Ms. Ramage. So we must decide whether this breach warrants disciplinary action or removal from your committee position. The tension in the room soared. Brenda's face was bright with embarrassment, her mouth set in a tight line. She looked around, perhaps searching for an ally, but found only stern expressions. The board recessed for 15 minutes to discuss. We all waited in hushed clusters, exchanging gossip about Brenda's comeuppance. Yvonne, Brenda's sidekick, hovered nearby, looking crestfallen. It seemed even she realized that the tide was turning. When the board returned, the president delivered their verdict. Brenda would be removed from any unofficial leadership roles, like head of the Cleanliness campaign, pending further review, and her proposal for bathroom inspections would be formally terminated. She'd also be required to issue a written apology to any residents who felt threatened by her remarks about shutting off plumbing. While the board didn't have the power to fully remove her from the HOA, she was still a homeowner. After all, this was a significant blow to her local authority. She'd no longer preside over the petty committees that she once governed with an iron fist. Brenda's cheeks burned red, her mouth pressed into a tight, furious line. She accepted the punishment with minimal comment, but the tension in her posture spoke volumes. She was furious. A quick glance in my direction revealed a dagger-like stare. She clearly blamed me for orchestrating her public downfall. In the days that followed, a new sense of relief washed over the neighborhood. People no longer worried about random inspections or draconian rules popping up overnight. The entire fiasco served as a cautionary tale. Even the most overbearing member of the HOA couldn't do whatever they pleased without facing consequences. Yet, something in the back of my mind told me that Brenda might not let this go quietly. She had lost face, but her pride was strong. She might look for new ways to reassert her dominance. I braced myself for future showdowns, but for the moment, I reveled in the calm that followed her comeuppance. The next few weeks were surprisingly peaceful. Without Brenda's constant directives, the association meeting agendas stuck to routine matters: landscaping budgets, sidewalk repairs, and planning a summer barbecue. The entire tone of the community felt lighter. In fact, people started using the common areas more. They strolled through the park, chatted at the mail kiosk, or set up small gatherings in the clubhouse. Brenda still lived here, of course. We'd occasionally see her drive by, her face set in a neutral mask. She no longer jumped out to chastise anyone. It was as if she'd retreated to lick her wounds in private. I took advantage of this lull to improve my own condo. I redecorated, adding some modern shelves in my living room and a few potted plants on the balcony. My neighbor, Tim, confided in me that he'd previously hesitated to make changes or hold gatherings for fear of Brenda's scrutiny. Now he felt free, but it wasn't entirely silent on Brenda's front. One evening, As I was coming home from work, I spotted her in a heated discussion with Yvonne out on the sidewalk. I lingered by my car, trying not to look obvious as I eavesdropped. Makes me look incompetent, Brenda hissed. They all think they can run this place without me. Yvonne shook her head, her voice low. Karen, you're fighting an uphill battle. People are angry. Maybe it's time to let them have their illusions. Brenda's eyes narrowed. I refuse to stand by while they ruin the order of this neighborhood. They need a firm hand. If the board won't let me keep things in check, I'll find another way. Her tone sent a shiver down my spine. It was the voice of someone who couldn't let go of control. I hurried inside before they could notice me. As I locked the door, I wondered if I should warn others that Brenda was plotting something. But a part of me felt she'd lost too much credibility. Perhaps even if she tried something, no one would take her seriously. Just when I started to believe Brenda's power had truly waned, rumors circulated of a special committee forming to address community aesthetics. The rumor was that Brenda planned to push a policy banning certain colors of curtains, restricting the types of plants on balconies, and limiting how many personal items could be displayed, all under the guise of beautification, a cunning approach. She might not have the official authority she once claimed, but if she pitched it as a volunteer initiative, she could recruit like-minded busybodies. Over coffee one morning, Michelle told me she spotted Brenda posting flyers in the clubhouse. They read, "Join the Neighborhood Improvement Task Force. Help keep our community pristine." It didn't mention bathroom inspections or plumbing shutoffs, but it had Brenda's fingerprints all over it. It's never enough for her, is it? I grumbled. She loses one battle, and she's already on to the next. Michelle shrugged. At least now everyone knows to be wary. She won't catch us off guard again. Sure enough, people started ignoring the flyers. They recognized that Neighborhood Improvement Task Force was just Brenda's attempt to regain clout. Only a handful of residents, some new to the area and unfamiliar with her reputation, expressed interest. Without widespread support, the task force was stillborn. Brenda sulked, apparently lacking the numbers to enforce yet another set of draconian rules. In private, I almost felt sorry for her. She was a middle-aged woman who'd wrapped her identity around controlling others. But any sympathy vanished when I recalled how she threatened to intrude on my personal space and strip away the privacy of every neighbor. One Saturday afternoon, I was working in my front yard, trimming hedges and clearing out weeds. To my surprise, Brenda approached me. She wore her usual formal attire despite the casual day, her posture stiff. "Afternoon," she said, her voice lacking its usual edge. I paused in mid-cut, eyebrows raised. "Brenda." "Hello." She glanced at my hedges, then cleared her throat. "I see you're keeping your property in good order." I waited for some jab or critique, but none came. "Yes, I am." Her gaze flickered around awkwardly. "Listen, I wanted to clarify something about the bathroom situation. I truly was worried about health hazards. My sister's home was once overrun by mold. It cost thousands to repair." I studied her face. She seemed almost genuine, but part of me knew better than to fully trust her. "Still," she continued, "I realize I overstepped. The board made that abundantly clear. But you should know, I'm not just a bad guy. I'm trying to look out for the community in my own way. Perhaps I took it too far." That was an understatement. "You threatened to cut off water to folks, Brenda. That's pretty far beyond normal concern." She gave a small nod, pursing her lips. "I let my emotions get the best of me. But you humiliated me, putting up those posters. Now everyone sees me as an evil villain." There it was. A flicker of bitterness. She was still fixated on how she'd been embarrassed. I exhaled slowly. "Brenda, you humiliated yourself. No one forced you to come into my bathroom with a camera. You took those photos. You circulated them. The posters simply told the story from my side." She frowned, but said nothing. Then she mumbled, "I guess I owe you an apology." It was a weak apology, but it was something. Surprised, I found myself softening, just a bit. We all want a clean, safe neighborhood. But that doesn't mean we forfeit privacy or personal rights. She looked away. Maybe we can find a balance in the future. A few weeks later, the unimaginable happened. A pipe burst in one of the older buildings in Ashgrove Estates, flooding 2 adjacent units. Water damage threatened the hallways, and the occupants had to temporarily relocate. It turned into a minor crisis, one that overshadowed petty rules about bathroom inspections. The HOA scrambled to address the damage, setting up a fundraiser to help the affected neighbors repair or replace waterlogged belongings. It was an opportunity for the community to come together, prove that we could support one another without overbearing tactics or prying into personal property. Much to my astonishment, Brenda was one of the first to volunteer at the fundraiser. She organized donation jars and coordinated with the local hardware store for discounts on replacement materials. At the event, while everyone sold baked goods and raffle tickets, Brenda diligently logged every sale, ensuring full transparency. Tim, who had once shouted at her in a meeting, even congratulated her. "You're doing good work here, Karen. Brenda." He blushed, realizing he'd used the nickname. But Brenda just nodded and continued her administrative tasks. The tension in the air had shifted. People still remembered the fiasco, but at least now, they saw her in a new light, someone capable of channeling her energy into something positive, if she chose. Even I ended up helping in a raffle booth alongside her. We didn't talk about the bathroom fiasco, but we worked together smoothly enough. By the day's end, we'd raised a hefty sum for the families who suffered water damage. As I walked home, arms tired from the day's hustle, I couldn't help but marvel at how circumstances can shift. A month ago, I would have done anything to avoid Brenda. Now, we'd spent an entire day collaborating on a community cause. Time passed, and slowly the memory of the bathroom inspections debacle faded into the background. Whenever people joked about Karen's fiasco, they always added a comment about how Brenda had at least tried to redeem herself afterward. The HOA, for its part, introduced clearer guidelines. No personal inspections of private property without official warrants or urgent emergencies. They listed precisely what the association could and couldn't do. That sense of transparency eased everyone's minds. Brenda remained in the neighborhood, still a homeowner and still with a keen interest in community affairs. Yet her manner changed. Whether from genuine humility or a resigned acceptance that her old tactics wouldn't fly anymore, she toned down her aggression. She became more mindful of how her actions might be perceived. No one called her Karen to her face, though the nickname never fully died in private. She would always be Karen in a neighborhood sense, but with less sting attached to it now. Meanwhile, I kept living my life, enjoying the newly relaxed atmosphere at Ashgrove Estates. I continued to decorate my condo, host friends on weekends, and stay active in the association, albeit on more positive terms. With Brenda no longer breathing down our necks, the community discovered a sense of camaraderie that had been missing under her watchful, critical eye. A few months later, as I strolled through the neighborhood on an early summer evening, I passed by Brenda's house. She was outside, watering her petunias. We exchanged polite nods. I noticed she no longer looked so severe. There was a moment, a flicker of a friendly wave, and we both went on our way without incident or tension. In the end, the fiasco over bathroom inspections and cleanliness turned out to be a catalyst for change. It forced the HOA to clarify its rules, made neighbors unite in defending their privacy, and, most surprising of all, compelled Brenda Karen Ramage to reflect on her overbearing behavior. Though she'd never be the warmest or most humble member of the community, we discovered that even the toughest personalities could be softened when faced with collective pushback and a little compassion. Ashgrove Estates became a place where we could all breathe easier. And that was the happy ending we never saw coming.